Have you ever had the feeling that no matter how much energy you pour into your work, you're still stuck in the same place? You give everything you have, yet the progress you expect never seems to arrive. You might be the one who shows up before anyone else and stays long after everyone's gone, but somehow the rewards don't reflect the sacrifice. Maybe you're pulling 10 or 12-hour days, pushing yourself to the edge, fact while someone else clocks out early and still ends up moving ahead faster than you. It's frustrating, confusing, and deeply unfair. You start asking yourself what you're doing wrong. Or perhaps you're completely drained, running on little sleep, living in a constant state of stress, watching others reach their goals with what appears to be far less effort. While you're struggling just to keep going, they seem to glide forward effortlessly. If you've ever questioned why pure hard work doesn't guarantee success, or if you're exhausted from giving your all and seeing nothing meaningful in return, then this story is something you need to hear. It might completely reshape the way you think about effort, productivity, and progress. Because long ago, there was a farmer who believed that working harder was the only path to success. He pushed himself relentlessly, ignoring every warning sign until his life nearly fell apart. It wasn't until a single, unexpected encounter that he finally understood a crucial truth: the real difference between blind effort and working with a smart, intentional strategy. Stay with me until the very end, because this part matters. In a quiet agricultural valley where farming had been a way of life for centuries, there lived a 32-year-old man named Thomas. He wasn't wealthy or famous, just an ordinary farmer who owned a small 10-acre plot of land passed down from his father. To Thomas, this land was more than property. It was legacy. And above all else, Thomas believed in one sacred principle: relentless hard work. Every single day, long before dawn broke the sky, Thomas was already awake. At exactly 4 a.m., while the rest of the valley slept, he stepped into his fields. He rejected modern equipment and efficient machinery, convinced that spending money on tools was a sign of weakness. "My father worked this land by hand," he would proudly say, "and my grandfather before him. Honest success only comes from hard labor." So Thomas did everything the hardest way possible. He planted seeds one by one with his fingers. He carried buckets of water across the fields instead of using irrigation. He bent down to remove every weed himself. From the first hint of sunrise until darkness swallowed the land, Thomas worked without pause. His hands were cracked, rough, and often bleeding. His back ached constantly. Still, he wore his exhaustion like a medal, believing pain was proof that he was doing things right. When night finally came, he collapsed into bed, too drained to eat a proper meal and far too tired to talk with his wife, Sarah. She watched him grow thinner and quieter every week. One night, she finally said, her voice trembling, "Thomas, this isn't living. You're destroying yourself. There has to be another way." Thomas shook his head firmly. "Sarah, nothing worthwhile comes without sacrifice. Hard work never betrays you. I just need to push harder." The other farmers in the valley talked about him often. Some admired his dedication. Others felt sorry for him. "That man works like three people combined," they would say. And it was true. If effort alone created wealth, Thomas would have been the richest man in the valley. But reality told a different story. Despite working longer hours than anyone else, Thomas barely made enough to survive. Each harvest felt like a narrow escape from failure. Each season dragged him closer to debt. His crops were nothing special. His yields were disappointing. And worst of all, he had no life beyond his work. No rest, no joy, no time for the people he loved. Right beside Thomas's land lived another farmer named Richard. Richard was the same age. He owned the same amount of land. In fact, he had started with even fewer resources. Yet his lifestyle looked completely different. Richard worked from 8 in the morning until around 2 in the afternoon. 6 hours, no more. He invested in efficient irrigation systems. He hired extra help during peak seasons. In the evenings, he read books, spent time with his family, and traveled whenever he could. And somehow, almost impossibly, Richard's farm produced nearly twice as much as Thomas's. This difference tormented Thomas. Night after night, he lay awake replaying the numbers in his head, unable to understand how less work was creating better results. Then came one of the harshest summers the valley had seen in years. A brutal drought settled over the land. Water sources dried up, Wells dropped lower each week. Every farmer faced the same terrifying question. How do you keep crops alive when the most essential resource is disappearing? And this challenge would force Thomas to confront a truth he had avoided his entire life. Instead of slowing down, Thomas made a choice that felt natural to him. He decided to push even harder. He began waking up at 3 a.m., stealing another hour from his already exhausted body. Before the sky even hinted at daylight, he was on his feet, hauling heavy buckets of water from a well far from his fields. Day after day, he made nearly 50 trips, each one draining what little strength he had left. His muscles burned, his lungs struggled, and every joint screamed for rest, but he ignored the warnings. Hard work never fails, he whispered to himself again and again, repeating the words like a sacred promise. While Thomas punished his body, Richard took a completely different approach. Instead of working longer hours, Richard fine-tuned his irrigation system, scheduling water flow during the coolest parts of the day. By reducing evaporation and waste, he kept his crops alive with far less effort and far less water. On the 15th day of Thomas's brutal routine, his body finally reached its limit. As he carried what must have been his 40th bucket of the day, his vision suddenly narrowed. The world tilted. His hands lost their strength, and the bucket slipped free, spilling precious water into the dry soil. Thomas collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, his heart pounding wildly out of rhythm. Sarah found him moments later, collapsed between rows of wilting crops, too weak to stand, barely conscious. The doctor didn't soften the truth. "Mr. Thomas," he said gravely, "your body is shutting down. You're severely dehydrated, dangerously sleep-deprived, and on the verge of a heart attack. If you continue this way, you won't live to see the next harvest. Not because of the drought, but because your body will give out." That night, confined to bed with IV fluids flowing into his arm, Thomas stared at the ceiling in silence. For the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar and terrifying. Defeat. Not defeat caused by the weather, not defeat caused by bad luck, but defeat rooted in a realization that shook him to his core, the possibility that everything he believed about success might be wrong. "I did everything I was taught to do," he whispered to Sarah. "I worked harder than anyone. I gave up my health, my time, my life. Why am I still failing?" Sarah squeezed his hand gently and answered with a quiet honesty. "Maybe, my love, working harder isn't the solution. Maybe there's something important you've never been shown." Her words echoed in Thomas's mind all night. 3 days later, once he was strong enough to walk again, Thomas did something his pride had never allowed before. He walked across the dirt path, separating his land from Richard's, and knocked on his neighbor's door. Richard opened it with genuine surprise and concern. "Thomas, I heard about what happened. Please come in." They sat together on Richard's porch, overlooking fields of lush, healthy crops. Thomas studied the land, greener, fuller, and nearly twice as productive as his own struggling farm. He felt envy, yes, but also something new, curiosity. "Richard," Thomas said at last, his voice softer and humbler than it had ever been before, "I need to understand." "I don't understand," Thomas said quietly. "I work twice as long as you do. I give my farm everything I have, my time, my strength, my health. And yet you work fewer hours and somehow produce far better results. How is that possible?" Richard didn't answer right away. He studied Thomas's tired face for a moment, then stood up and smiled gently. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." They walked together toward Richard's tool shed. Inside, Richard reached for 2 axes and placed them side by side. One was old, chipped, and blunt from years of use. The other was polished, sharp, and carefully maintained. "Picture this," Richard said. 2 men are competing to cut down trees. He handed Thomas the dull axe. "The first man believes one thing above all else, that working longer and harder will always win. He swings his axe nonstop for 12 straight hours. No breaks, no rest. He thinks effort alone guarantees results." Richard pointed to a thick wooden log. "Go ahead, try." Thomas swung the axe. It struck the log and bounced back with a dull thud. He swung again and again. After 10 heavy swings, his breathing grew rough. Sweat dripped down his face. The log barely showed a shallow groove. Richard then picked up the sharp axe. "With the second woodcutter," he continued, "things looked different." He swung once. The blade sank deep into the wood. A second swing. Then a third. On the fourth strike, the log split cleanly in half. This man works fewer hours, Richard said, but every hour, he stops for 10 minutes to sharpen his axe. When the other man laughs at him and says, "Why are you wasting time? Just keep swinging." Richard looked back at Thomas. But by the end of the day, the man who paused to sharpen his tool has cut down twice as many trees. Silence hung in the shed. "You," Richard said softly, meeting Thomas's eyes, "are the first woodcutter. You've been swinging a dull axe for years, bleeding hands, aching body, wondering why the tree never falls." They stepped outside, walking slowly through Richard's land as he continued explaining. "There are 3 rules I live by," Richard said. "First, systems matter more than raw effort. I don't carry water by hand. I installed a drip irrigation system that sends water straight to the roots with almost no waste. Yes, it cost money at the start, but now it runs automatically, even while I sleep. You spend hours hauling buckets. My system does the same work in minutes. Second, focus beats constant hustle. I grow only 2 crops. One's perfectly suited to this soil. You grow 5. Your energy is scattered. Mine is concentrated. I master 2 things. You struggle to manage 5. Mastery creates excellence. Scattered effort creates average results. And third, Richard said, pausing, rest is not laziness, it's strategy. I sleep well. I exercise. I take breaks. That keeps my mind sharp. I notice problems early. I think creatively. I improve my systems. You're so exhausted that you can't see clearly. Mistakes cost you more time than rest ever would." Richard placed a firm but kind hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You're not failing because you don't work hard enough," he said. "You're failing because hard work is the only tool you know how to use." He gestured toward the fields. "There's a difference between movement and progress, between being constantly busy and actually being effective. Hard work is important. I respect it deeply. But hard work without direction isn't success. It's suffering." Richard smiled. "It's time to sharpen your axe." Thomas walked back home that evening, carrying more than exhaustion. His mind was crowded with questions, but for the first time in years, his heart carried something unfamiliar and powerful: hope. Instead of rushing straight back into the fields like he always did, Thomas paused. He sat down at the kitchen table with Sarah, a notebook between them. His voice was calm, almost humble. "Help me learn how to think differently," he said. The next morning, Thomas made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just weeks earlier. He worked for only 4 hours, and then he stopped. Not to rest, but to learn. He spent the remainder of the day researching irrigation methods, visiting the local agricultural office, speaking with suppliers, and studying how other farms improved efficiency. For the first time, he wasn't reacting to problems. He was designing solutions. Within 2 weeks, Thomas sold an old tractor that had sat unused for years and used the money to purchase a simple drip irrigation system. Installing it took 3 full days of focused effort. But once it was running, everything changed. What had once taken 6 exhausting hours of hauling water every day now required less than 20 minutes. The extra time became an investment, not in more labor, but in better thinking. Thomas began improving soil quality, analyzing crop cycles, and planning weeks ahead instead of scrambling day by day. He reduced his crops from 5 different varieties down to just 2, the ones best suited to his land and most profitable in the market. Instead of being average at many things, he became exceptional at a few. During the busiest weeks, he hired a neighbor's teenage son to help, paying him fairly and treating him with respect. And Thomas made a discovery that shocked him. 1 hour of thoughtful planning created more value than 10 hours of blind effort ever had. But the most important transformation didn't happen in the fields. It happened at home. For the first time in years, Thomas sat down to dinner with Sarah. They talked. They laughed. He had the energy to play with his children instead of collapsing from exhaustion. He started exercising in the mornings, which made him stronger, clearer-headed, and more focused during work hours. Friends began to notice. "Thomas," they said, "you're working less, but you look healthier, happier." He would smile and reply, "I finally realized you can't make good decisions when you're completely drained. I'm not working less. I'm working smarter." 6 months later, harvest season arrived. Thomas's land, now efficiently irrigated and carefully managed, produced 40% more than his best year ever. Not because he worked longer days, but because every hour had purpose. He worked 7 hours a day instead of 15, yet those 7 hours achieved more than all his past effort combined. One evening, Richard walked through Thomas's fields, studying the healthy crops and well-organized systems. He nodded with quiet approval. "You learned the lesson," Richard said. "You're no longer just someone who works hard. Punks, you're someone who works intelligently." Thomas clasped Richard's hand firmly. "Thank you for showing me that there's more than one way to build something meaningful." And my friend, Thomas's story isn't really about farming at all. It's about anyone who believes that pain is proof of progress, that exhaustion equals success, and that suffering is the price of achievement. Sometimes, the breakthrough doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from finally stopping long enough to sharpen the axe. We've been taught to believe that if we're not completely drained, then we must not be pushing hard enough. That exhaustion is proof of commitment. That suffering equals progress. But here's the truth most people are never told. Hard work matters, but on its own, it's not enough. The people who achieve the greatest results are rarely the ones working the longest hours. They're the ones using their hours wisely. They don't just work harder, they work smarter. So remember these 3 principles. First, before increasing your effort, question your approach. Ask yourself whether there's a smarter system available. Don't keep carrying water one bucket at a time if you can build a pipeline. Don't repeat tasks manually when technology can automate them. And don't rely on brute force when thoughtful strategy can solve the problem faster and better. Second, focus always beats nonstop hustle. Trying to do everything guarantees average results. Instead, identify the 2 or 3 activities that create the most value and dedicate yourself fully to mastering them. Excellence in a few critical areas will always outperform mediocrity spread across many. Third, and this is crucial, rest is not the enemy of productivity. It's a core component of it. A fatigued mind makes costly mistakes. A rested mind recognizes patterns, opportunities, and solutions. You cannot think clearly, creatively, or strategically when you're running on empty. So here's your challenge. Look closely at your work this week. Identify the single task that consumes the most of your time and energy. Then ask yourself one honest question. Is there a smarter way to do this? Could a system replace effort? Could a tool speed it up? Could this be delegated, automated, or redesigned? Then choose just one afternoon, not a whole week, not a whole month. One afternoon to build a smarter solution instead of simply pushing harder. Because here's the lesson Thomas learned, and the one you need to remember. You are not a machine built to run until failure. You are a human being with a powerful mind capable of leverage, creativity, and intelligent design. Stop exhausting yourself swinging a dull axe. It's time to sharpen it. If this story resonated with you, if you've been grinding yourself into burnout, support this message by liking the video and sharing it with someone who needs permission to work smarter, not just harder. Leave a comment below. What's one task you're going to optimize this week? Let's exchange ideas and grow together. I'll see you next week with another story designed to change how you think about success. Until then, remember this: strategy beats exhaustion every single time. Your best work comes from a sharp mind, not a broken body.